In a world where luxury and danger collide, an unexpected love story unfolds between two souls from completely different worlds. She is Selin Yilmaz, a billionaire heiress trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by wealth but feeling an emptiness that no amount of money can fill. He is Arda Demir, a feared mafioso, the leader of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Turkey, with a past stained by shadows and blood. When their paths cross, a passionate, uncontrollable connection ignites, threatening to destroy everything they have built. In a city where love is forbidden, loyalty is tested, and death lurks around every corner, can Selin and Arda's love survive? Or will the price they pay be more than they can ever imagine? Prepare yourself for a journey full of passion, mystery, and impossible choices. Don't miss this story because fate is about to change. But before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the Love and Mystery Turkish Stories channel, and share this video with everyone you know. Your support is essential for me to keep bringing more thrilling stories like this one. Now let's dive into this captivating tale, filled with passion, mystery, and twists. Watch as two very different worlds collide. Selin Yilmaz was a woman who had everything that money could offer. Born into a family of billionaires, she lived surrounded by luxury and power, but no amount of wealth could ever fill the void inside her. She had the finest clothes, the most extravagant parties, and the most luxurious mansions in the world. But there was one thing that her life lacked: freedom. Every decision in her life had been made for her, and she was expected to play her role as the perfect daughter, the perfect heir to her family's empire. But Selin's heart longed for something different. The weight of her family's expectations bore down on her, and the older she became, the more she felt trapped in her own life. She didn't want to follow the rigid path set for her. She wanted to experience life, to feel love, to make her own choices. However, that was not something her father, Mehmet Yilmaz, a powerful magnate, would ever allow. To him, Selin was just another piece in his grand plan, and his ambition overshadowed her desires. Arda Demir, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. At 30 years old, he had earned a reputation in Istanbul's criminal underworld as one of the most feared and respected mafiosos. Arda was a man of few words, a leader who ruled his empire with an iron fist. He had no time for love or romance. He believed such emotions were weaknesses, things that could be exploited by his enemies. He lived for power, control, and survival in a world where trust was a luxury he could not afford. Arda's world was dark, filled with betrayal, violence, and the constant threat of danger. But beneath his hard exterior, there was a man who had once believed in love, only to have his heart shattered in the cruelest way possible. He had learned to suppress his emotions, to bury them so deep that even he had forgotten what it felt like to care for someone. One night, fate brought these two people together in the most unexpected way at the Grand Yilmaz family gala, one of the most exclusive and luxurious events in Istanbul. Selin's father, Mehmet Yilmaz, hosted the gala every year, inviting the wealthiest and most powerful figures from around the world. For Selin, it was just another night of being paraded around, smiling for the cameras, shaking hands with people she didn't care about. But that night, something was different. As Selin entered the ballroom, her eyes met Arda's for the first time. It was a brief moment, but the connection between them was undeniable. The intensity in his gaze stirred something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, something she couldn't ignore. For Arda, it was the same. He had been invited to the gala by one of his business associates, but as soon as he saw Selin, he couldn't help but be captivated. She was different from the women he usually encountered, women who sought him out for his power and influence. There was something more about her, something raw, real, and undeniably beautiful. Their eyes locked again later in the evening, and this time they couldn't look away. It was as if time had frozen, and for a brief second the rest of the world disappeared. Arda knew he should stay away from her. After all, she was the daughter of one of his most important business partners, but the pull he felt toward her was impossible to resist. She too felt the connection, but she was cautious. She had been taught to avoid the likes of men like him. After all, Arda Demir was not someone who played by the rules. He was dangerous. As the night wore on, their brief encounters turned into conversations, and those conversations became more and more personal. Selin found herself drawn to him, and for the first time in a long while, she felt alive. She wanted to know more about Arda, about the man behind the rumors, the dark figure who dominated the streets of Istanbul. But as much as she was intrigued, she knew that getting involved with him would mean crossing a line she could never uncross. Arda, for his part, was struggling with his own feelings. He had never allowed anyone to get close to him, but with Selin, he felt something different. She was a puzzle, one that he wanted to solve, even though he knew the risks involved. He couldn't let her in. He couldn't afford to care. But every time they spoke, every time their hands brushed, the walls he had carefully built around himself began to crumble. As the days passed after their first meeting at the Yilmaz family gala, neither Selin nor Arda could shake the memory of their encounter. The chemistry between them was undeniable, but the barriers that stood between them were monumental. For Selin, it was a mix of fear and excitement. She had always been taught that people like Arda were dangerous, men who lived in the shadows, men who thrived on power, manipulation, and violence. But there was something about him that she couldn't resist. He made her feel alive in a way no one else ever had. She found herself thinking about him more than she cared to admit, wondering if there was more to his story than the rumors and the fear that followed him wherever he went. For Arda, the attraction was equally overwhelming. He had never been interested in the lives of the rich and privileged. They were like characters in a story he had no place in. But Selin was different. She wasn't like the others, pretentious, manipulative, and driven by money and status. Selin was real. Beneath her beauty and elegance, he saw someone who was struggling with her own emptiness, much like him. And that vulnerability drew him in. Arda had always kept his emotions under control, buried deep within himself. But with Selin, he felt something stirring, something he couldn't explain. The next time they met, it was no coincidence. Arda had been watching Selin from afar, waiting for an opportunity to speak with her again. He knew it was risky, but he couldn't resist. He knew that her life, the one of wealth and privilege, was vastly different from his own, but he couldn't help himself. He needed to know her, needed to understand why he felt so drawn to her. Selin, on the other hand, wasn't sure if she should be seeing Arda again. Her family, particularly her father, had made it clear that she was not to associate with someone like him. But the more she tried to stay away, the stronger the pull toward him became. It was as if a magnetic force had taken hold of her, and she couldn't escape it. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with her father, Selin found herself wandering the streets of Istanbul, lost in her thoughts. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger at her father's control, confusion about her feelings for Arda, and a longing for freedom she had never experienced before. As she walked, her steps led her to a quiet cafe. Sitting at one of the tables, deep in thought, she didn't notice Arda approaching until he was standing right in front of her. "You look troubled," Arda said, his voice low and steady. Startled, Selin looked up, meeting his eyes. She felt a rush of warmth flood through her, her heart beating faster than usual. She had been avoiding him, but now, in his presence, everything else seemed to fade away. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed her. She had never been good at lying, especially not to him. Arda took a seat across from her, his gaze fixed on her. "I don't believe you," he said softly, his eyes scanning her face. "You don't seem fine." For a moment, Selin was silent. She didn't know how to explain the turmoil inside her, the conflict between the life she had been born into and the life she secretly longed for. She could feel the weight of her father's expectations pressing down on her, but she also felt the irresistible pull of her connection with Arda. There was no simple answer, no easy way to reconcile the two worlds she found herself trapped between. "I'm not," she admitted quietly. "I don't know what I want anymore." Arda leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Then let me show you a world where you don't have to choose between the two, where you can have freedom but also the life you deserve, a life where you don't have to be controlled by anyone." Selin's heart skipped a beat. She knew what he was offering. Freedom from her family's grip, freedom from the expectations that suffocated her every day. But there was a price to be paid. Arda's world was dangerous, filled with risks that could cost her everything. And yet, there was a part of her, a part she had buried for so long, that yearned for the very thing he was offering. "What are you asking me to do?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm asking you to trust me," Arda said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Trust that there's more to life than the golden cage you've been placed in. Come with me, and I'll show you what it means to live on your own terms, no more being someone else's puppet." Selin's mind raced. The danger of getting involved with someone like Arda was undeniable. Her father would never forgive her if he found out, and her entire life would be turned upside down. But as she looked into Arda's eyes, she felt an overwhelming urge to take the risk. Maybe this was what she had been waiting for her whole life. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Show me." And so began the forbidden journey that would change both of their lives forever. They met in secret, hidden away from the world that would condemn their love. Their moments together were fleeting, but each one was more intense than the last. With every kiss, every touch, their bond deepened and their passion grew. But as their love blossomed, so did the consequences of their actions. The more they saw each other, the more their worlds collided. Arda's enemies began to take notice, and soon the threat of danger loomed over them both. Selin's father, ever vigilant, began to suspect that something was going on, though he had no idea just how close Selin was to the man he considered his enemy. The pressure mounted, and Selin realized that her love for Arda came with a price, one that she might not be ready to pay. But no matter how much she tried to resist, she couldn't escape the pull of her feelings for him. As the stakes grew higher, Selin and Arda knew that their love could destroy them both, or give them the freedom they had always craved. As the days passed, Selin and Arda found themselves tangled deeper and deeper in a web of passion and danger. What started as stolen moments between two people from vastly different worlds quickly turned into a high-stakes game where the risks were constantly growing. They both knew that the path they had chosen could destroy everything they had ever known, but neither could turn away now. For Selin, the weight of her decision began to hit harder each day. The luxury, the protection, and the privilege she had once taken for granted were now slipping away. She was no longer the untouchable heiress. She was a woman in love with a man who was anything but safe. Arda's world was dark and dangerous, and every moment they spent together only seemed to make her own life more precarious. But despite the fear, despite the threats that loomed on the horizon, Selin couldn't bring herself to regret it. Arda was the first person to ever make her feel alive, to make her feel like she wasn't just a figurehead in a family empire. She had found in him something she never expected: freedom. For Arda, the consequences of being with Selin weighed heavily as well. His enemies were growing bolder. The moment he became involved with the Yilmaz family, he knew that the risks would escalate. Selin was the daughter of one of his most powerful business partners, and getting involved with her meant crossing lines he had always stayed behind. But despite the danger, Ada couldn't resist her. She had become a part of his world, and the thought of losing her was more terrifying than anything his enemies could do to him. The tension in their relationship began to build with each passing day. Every time they met, the threat of being caught hung over them like a dark cloud. They knew that if anyone discovered their love, the fallout would be catastrophic. But even with the danger looming, they couldn't stop what was happening between them. One evening, after a particularly difficult meeting with her father, Selin found herself alone in her luxurious penthouse, the weight of her choices sinking in. She had fought with her father earlier that day, who had become increasingly suspicious of her behavior. The control he had once wielded over her life was slipping, and he knew it. The confrontation had been heated, and she could feel the walls closing in around her. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and without thinking, she picked it up. It was a message from Ada. "Meet me tonight. I need to see you." Selin's heart raced. She had been trying to avoid him for a few days, knowing that the more they saw each other, the more dangerous it became. But every time she thought about pulling away, something inside her rebelled. She couldn't live without him, couldn't live in the suffocating world her father had built for her. The pull between them was too strong. She quickly typed back, "I'll be there." When Selin arrived at the place Ada had chosen, a quiet, hidden rooftop bar with a view of the city, her heart was pounding. The soft breeze brushed her face as she walked toward the secluded corner where Ada was waiting. His back was turned to her, but he sensed her presence before she even spoke. "You're late," he said without turning around. "I had to make sure no one was watching," Selin replied, her voice low. Ada turned to face her, his gaze intense. The sight of her made his chest tighten. Despite the chaos and the danger, he couldn't deny the way she made him feel. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice heavy with unspoken tension. "I've been trying to be smart," Selin confessed, stepping closer to him. "My father is getting suspicious. He doesn't trust me anymore, and I can feel him closing in on me." Ada's jaw tightened. He hated that she was caught in the middle of this, that her life had become a battleground because of their love. "You don't have to do this," he said, taking her hand. "We can leave. We can go somewhere far away, where none of this matters." But Selin shook her head. "I can't. My family, Ada. They will never let me go. They'll come after you. And I can't let them destroy everything you've worked for." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their decisions hanging between them. Ada reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle but firm. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "We'll find a way to make this work. I won't let anyone come between us." Just as they shared a moment of quiet connection, the sound of a car screeching to a halt below broke the silence. Selin's heart skipped a beat. She knew that sound all too well, the unmistakable sound of her father's security detail. Ada's eyes flicked toward the sound, his expression hardening. "Get in the car!" he commanded, his voice urgent. "Now!" Selin didn't question him. She followed him as they hurried down the stairs to a nearby alley where Ada's car was waiting. The sleek black car sped off into the night. But Selin couldn't shake the feeling that their time together was running out. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as Ada's car raced through the dark streets of Istanbul. Selin's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of how far she had come, how much she had risked, and how little she truly knew about the consequences of her actions. The city's lights blurred past them as they sped away from the danger, but Selin couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how far they ran, they could never outrun the storm that was brewing around them. Ada's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his jaw clenched in determination. He knew that the stakes had never been higher. His enemies were closing in, and the more Selin became involved in his world, the more vulnerable she became. But there was no turning back now. The moment they crossed that line, there was no way to undo the damage. "Where are we going?" Selin finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Arda glanced at her, his eyes dark with determination. "I have a safe house, a place where we can lay low for a while. It's the only way to keep you safe." But Selin wasn't reassured. She had seen the fear in his eyes, the way he had reacted when the sound of her father's security detail had interrupted their moment. Arda, the man who had ruled with power and fear, had shown a vulnerability she had never expected. It was then that she realized just how much he was willing to sacrifice for her, just how far he would go to protect her. "We can't keep running forever," Selin said, her voice steady now. "We have to face this, Arda. We have to make a choice." Arda's eyes flicked to her, his expression hardening. "And what choice would you have us make? Leave everything behind? Go somewhere no one can find us?" "I don't know," she whispered, her heart heavy. "But I can't keep living like this, hiding, lying. I'm suffocating, Arda." They drove in silence for a few minutes, the weight of her words settling between them. They both knew that the life they had built together, hidden away from the world, their love kept in the shadows, couldn't last forever. The choices they made now would decide their futures, and neither of them was prepared for the consequences. Eventually, Arda pulled the car into an unmarked parking garage on the outskirts of the city. It was dark and quiet, the perfect place to lay low for a while. He parked the car and turned to Selin, his gaze softening for a moment. "Stay here," he said. "I'll go get everything set up." But Selin didn't stay in the car. She followed him, determined to confront the reality of their situation. As they made their way through the building, Selin couldn't help but feel the weight of what she was leaving behind. Her family, her empire, the life she had always known, it was all slipping through her fingers, and there was no going back. Inside the safe house, it was quiet, almost eerily so. Arda led her to a small, modest room, the kind that spoke of a life lived in the shadows, far from the opulence of her previous world. But as she looked around, she realized that this was the life she had chosen. There was no luxury here, no comfort, just survival. Selin sat down on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. What had she done? What was she willing to sacrifice for love? And more importantly, what would Arda sacrifice for her? The man she had come to love so deeply was no stranger to danger, but what if this love was too costly? Arda came to stand in front of her, his gaze intense. He reached out to touch her hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. "Selin," he said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of tenderness and fear. "I will protect you. No matter what happens, I'll keep you safe." "I don't want you to protect me anymore," Selin whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't want to live in fear, hiding from the world. I want us to be free, Arda. I want to live a life where we don't have to look over our shoulders every second." Arda stood still, his eyes searching hers. For the first time, he realized the true extent of what he had dragged her into. He had pulled her into his world of crime, violence, and danger. He had exposed her to the very thing he had tried so hard to escape. The fear, the paranoia, the constant battle for survival. "We can't have that life," Arda said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not in my world. There is no freedom here." Selin stood up, her eyes locking with his. "Then maybe it's time we create our own world. Away from all of this, away from the violence, the lies. A world where we can be who we are, without fear. I love you, Arda, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this work." Tears welled up in Arda's eyes as he pulled her into his arms. For a moment, they just held each other, the weight of the world seeming to melt away in that one simple embrace. But as they pulled away, both knew that the decision was not theirs alone to make. Arda''s past would never be easy to escape, and Selin's family would never forgive her for choosing him over them. The next few days were filled with tension and uncertainty. Arda''s enemies were closing in, and Selin's father had issued a warning. If she didn't return home, he would take matters into his own hands. But despite the looming threat, Selin knew what she had to do. She had made her choice, and nothing would change it. On the final night, as the storm raged outside, Arda and Selin made one last desperate attempt to flee. They packed only the essentials, leaving behind the life they had known. They were determined to create a new beginning, one where they could finally live without fear. As they stepped into the night, ready to leave Istanbul behind, they heard the sound of approaching cars. The Yilmaz family's men had arrived. It was now or never. Arda took Selin's hand, his voice firm. "We go now, together." With a final glance at the city that had both brought them together and torn them apart, they ran into the night, leaving their past and all its dangers behind. The world ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together. So what do you think of the ending? Did Selin and Arda make the right choice? I hope you enjoyed this thrilling and emotional story. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends so they can enjoy the story too. And leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I want to know your thoughts on this ending, and if you want to see more stories like this, stay tuned for more on love and mystery Turkish stories. Until next time,